Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and we have got an incredible guest with us here today to kick off the week. What's going to be a really exciting week here on the show. Today's guest, I'm telling you, we are all going to walk away from today's episode because this guy's brilliance touches on so many things that is directly relevant to every single one of our businesses. So let me tell you about him. His name is Garrett Dailey. Garrett has spent the last decade working with, in, or on startups. He's been the director of operations for the boutique design firm that did the brand for Morning Brew, which is a huge global email newsletter that I'm a big fan of. He's been the chief of staff for Idea Market, and he was the founder of Aion Enterprises, a design agency. Currently, he's the co-founder of Lucid, a consultancy that helps you grow your business with clarity. And I'm not just going to tell you about Garrett's bio here today, because here in the intro, I want to confess to all of you publicly that when we came across the work that Garrett and Lucid are doing, it's right there at the top of their website, and we just said we need to invite Garrett on the show. The top of their website, the big headline says, "It's hard to grow your business when you don't know how to talk about it." How beautifully simple is that and directly appropriate to all of us? So I'm super excited about this. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Garrett Dailey. All right, Garrett, I am so excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Heck yeah, you have a lot to live up to because I think the work that you do is so brilliant in so many ways. And I know there's so many cool backstories as to how you've gained the perspectives that you have today. But first things first, take us beyond the bio. Who's Garrett? How'd you start doing all these things?
Oh boy. Let's see. So I grew up in a relatively unpleasant rural town in North Carolina. And the options were basically join the military or go to college. So while my dad was a special forces guy and my mom begged me not to join the military, I was like, okay, well, I got to go to school to get out of town, right? I went to school late. In between that time, I got a couple sales gigs. You know, I worked at a movie store at the mall in town and got pretty good at doing sales and ended up getting invited to do sales on a hair straightener kiosk with a bunch of Israelis. So we sold like $300-$400 hair straighteners. And basically I made a bargain in that process, which is like, if I get into school, I'm never going to do sales again. So I went to school for marketing and really just wasn't a huge fan of the process. I ended up, I think I was there for 3 semesters before I dropped out to start a business with a buddy of mine. We did, somebody I used to do sales with. So we did, my first business was a valet trash for multifamily housing. So the people in your apartment complex that take the trash out. And it was cool doing that because I got to do basically everything from start to finish, come up with the brand, build out the website, sales proposals, a lot of market research and outreach. We did exclusively cold stuff. So we were like showing up at people's apartments with little dollhouse trash cans we filled up with candy and put our brand on, stuff like that. We got through about a year of it before we realized neither of us were particularly passionate about trash. Moved out west. It's about when I started writing. So I was like somewhere living in a motel in between Colorado Springs and Pueblo, waiting for my buddy's house to close that we were going to live in. And I started writing a lot of philosophy. So was in Colorado doing random stuff. I was doing a lot of brand and marketing for like a vape delivery startup that one of my friends from college did. And really was just focused on writing at the time. So eventually I end up working at the Tesla factory in Reno, and my writing had started to pick up quite a bit. So I had a relatively well-read blog at the time called Master Self, which you can actually see my Reno license plate I still have from there. And in the process, we got into like a lot of, I was primarily focused on posting content on Twitter. There were a lot of people writing at the time. So I was doing like designing like Twitter headers for people, and we ended up building a small media company called Aion Media, where we had like 8 to 12 micro influencers. Some of them were writers. Some of them made video content. We did a lot of like multi-streamed group podcasts back when that was really hard to do. So back before Restream did anything except take stream inputs and stuff like that. And we ended up like writing a book as a group, as well as putting on like a 32 speaker digital conference. And at this point I was kind of realized like there's nothing happening in Reno. I've got to go where the action is. So I moved back to Raleigh, and at that point got a job at Paradigm, which is that design agency that I used to work at. So from there, that was kind of the thing that took me from being more of like a freelance designer to being really good. There's a lot of process and stuff I learned working there. But the thing that struck me that I didn't feel like we did enough of was focusing. Basically, we do these exercises called sprints with clients. And I realized that if, normally they ran for an hour, if we doubled them and did them for 2, sometimes longer, but at least 2 hours, the quality of the results that we would get was a lot higher. And they didn't want to hear it. That wasn't how we did stuff. So I ended up starting my own agency, Aion Enterprises. I was still running with the Aion team at this point. And really honed in on this idea of like, if the more we could really understand the deeper components of a brand, the mission, the vision, the values, and a relatively lengthy series of exercises that I developed, the higher quality the end results are. So I was doing this for a while. I probably branded website and ended up getting into pitch decks and stuff, maybe 60 companies or so while I was there. And in between there, one of my clients was a company called Idea Market that hired me as their chief of staff. I started out, I think, doing like 30 social graphics for them, and they loved it. And I was like, well, we should probably do some more stuff. And they brought me on to do more stuff. And eventually the founder's like, can you just build me a design department and build me a marketing team? So I was liaising with the dev team. I was designing product features. I had a couple, I think 2 designers under me, and I had 4 or 5 people on the marketing side that I was managing. It was pretty awesome. And that was the first time I got to work on a pitch deck. So we ended up raising $600K from a company called Mask.io. And we had raised $1 million before I came on. And that really ignited my love for pitch decks. Like that just is probably one of my favorite things in the world. The storytelling component of that, simplifying things down. So somewhere in the middle of my tenure at Idea Market, I realized we were going to run out of money and that there was we had some issues with the model of the platform. So I told the founder, I was like, hey, I don't think the maths, you should cut me and cut the marketing team and dump the budget into dev and see if you guys can pivot, because it'll at least buy you some time to hopefully raise another round. So I left in March of 22. And at the time I had an idea for a social media platform that I'd been working on for a long time. And I was like, okay, well, I know a little bit about raising. I know a little bit about some of this other stuff. So I went and built out a app prototype in Figma with all the screens, all the features, stuff like that. I brought on one of the guys that I worked with at Idea Market, who's a really good friend of mine, to do a lot of outreach to content creators. So the platform is called Gravity, which is a social media platform for content creators that allows them to own their own content, so you don't run into issues like YouTube adpocalypse or people getting deplatformed and losing access to their following, stuff like that. Started raising for that. We got as far as an offer in 5 pitches, which I'm pretty proud of that fact, right around the middle of 2022, which if anyone remembers what the raising environment was like then, it was very, very bad. Since all the VCs ran away for like a year and a half. So I didn't really like the terms of the offer, but I was pretty happy with how far we had gotten. I was like, okay, I should probably go back to just focusing on like pitch as a service and just become amazing at this, because in the future I'll probably end up raising at some point. So I decided to move to Austin, both because there's more of a startup scene. Like Raleigh, the startup scene is nearly non-existent, and the founders that are there are all fighting over a very small pie. Whereas Austin, I had come out in 2020 and I really liked it. I didn't realize how awesome it was here at the time, but I just liked it and I needed a change. So I came out to Austin, kept plugging away at the design agency, and somewhere in the process last year, I realized there are certain components of things that I wanted to do more of with the design agency that don't make sense in the context of a design agency, like digging more into the strategy the big picture stuff and really just communication overall. And in January of this year, I started Lucid. I brought on my co-founder, Brian Schuster, who he had been an advisor for Gravity. He and I had also worked on a company called Macro together. He was their head of growth. At Macro, it's a smart contract auditing firm. And we just love working together. He ended up doing solo consulting, and I referred 4 or 5 people to him. They all closed and went through, and everyone loved working with him. And it seemed that we had perfectly sequential services. So I asked Brian if he wanted to team up, because we had been, doing some back and forth stuff for a couple months. He was like, yeah. We started Lucid in January, and the reason it's called Lucid and all of that is actually to fix some of the branding and messaging things that I ran into with Aion being largely very difficult to pitch, which we could get into at some point if you want, because I can explain some mistakes that I made. But yeah, basically pivoted from doing more labor-based services to straightforward consulting. We still do a lot of stuff with pitch decks, but really our focus is on simplifying what typically are very technical products, working with technical founders to make it easy for them to communicate, sell, and grow what they're working on.
Yes, I love that overview for so many reasons, Garrett. But I guess 2 things I want to call out right now is, 1, I love me a good nonlinear story. And I'm going to call out that when we tune into podcasts, I feel like everything sounds linear. Listeners might be hearing this saying, well, Garrett, it sounds like one thing led to the next. But I know, because I've experienced it on my own journey, is that you had no clue what the next step was going to be. It only sounds that way in the rearview mirror. But huge kudos to you on the fact that you leveraged each of these steps to build upon and towards something else. So I love the way that you illustrate that story that you've gone through yourself. And then the other thing is, I love that. I think it's the one theme, and it's why I called it out at the top of this episode, is that keyword simplicity. It just seems like you bring so much simplicity to the things that you do. Not only, I'm going to call this out really early on in today's episode, from a design perspective, your stuff is just beautiful. The fonts you guys choose, literally everything, the white space, everything about your business is just, first of all, aesthetically beautiful, but secondly, it's so simple. And if we go back, speaking about your nonlinear journey, all the way back to writing about philosophy, I want to get inside your head, Garrett. How did all of that play into, because I'm a big believer that there's seedlings that are showing in what you do today. How did even those experiences play into the way that Lucid does business?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. I'm glad you asked. With Aion, I actually pitched, and this is part of why I pivoted, but I pitched Aion as business philosophy and design, because I really, really think there should be a formal field of business philosophy. And I won't go too deep down this rabbit hole, but at one point in history, every field of study was just called philosophy, right? Like math was just, Pythagoras was doing math, and for Pythagoras, math was like this weird ritual, sacred kind of endeavor. And then it got split off into the Pythagorean theorem and trigonometry and all this stuff. But everything at one point was called philosophy, because it's just the people that discovered things were just pursuing an understanding of the world. And so my theory was, if you had better philosophy in companies, and ideally you would get this earlier on, then the end result would be better. And I did actually quite a bit of research on this while I was doing Aion. And it turns out that if you look within an industry, and this is an industry that people generally like. So for example, like cars, it works. If you look at like insurance or financial stuff, often it doesn't show up as much. But in industries, the top ranked company will generally outperform their competitors by 10 to 20% on average if they have a clearly articulated philosophy, which is a crazy thing to say. But I've looked at probably a couple dozen industries, and my favorite example of this is pizza. If you look at all the pizza companies, I'll give you the abbreviated version of this. The number one pizza company is Domino's. They make, at the time that I did this probably 2 years ago, something like $800,000 per store per year on average. They have a really well articulated philosophy. It's very like hyper masculine, very like patriotic looking. It's red, white, and blue. It's very mechanical. It's very tech focused. So they invented 30 minutes or less. They invented the car with the pizza oven in it. They have stores that you can't sit in. It's very focused on efficiency, right? And their keyword is dominate. That's the center of their whole philosophy, is dominate the industry. Pizza Hut is not as clearly defined. They make about $50,000 less per store per year on average. They have this vague kind of feeling of like warm. You can sit in the restaurant. It's friendly. It's family oriented. Little Caesars is like, I think 100,000 less than Domino's or something like that. It's just franchising. That's their whole thing. And Papa John's at the bottom, they make, I want to say like $200,000 less than Domino's. It's kind of vague, but it's like better ingredients, better pizza. So their articulation of their philosophy gets progressively more vague as you go further down. However, if you go all the way down to 21 or 20 on the list, you have Mellow Mushroom, which most people, if you're not on the East Coast, you probably haven't been to, but if you get the chance, it's the best. Mellow Mushroom, for some reason, makes $1 million per store per year on average. So they make more than the difference between number 1 and number 4 on that list, above Domino's, right? And Mellow Mushroom has, for some reason, one of the best articulated philosophies of any company that I ever looked at. They have a central concept, which is be mellow, which means be mellow with the environment. So they are very sustainability oriented. Be mellow with the ingredients. So they use like organic and naturally sourced stuff. Be mellow with the people. All of their stores are designed differently. They'll have local materials in the buildings. They're situationally appropriate. So like there's one in North Raleigh that it's very high end, but they have like a big buried statue of Poseidon in the backyard. And the one that's downtown is more of the old school. It's got these big like silicone mushrooms in it. It's nuts. And all their menus are designed by local artists, right? So it's just a whole different thing. They can charge much more for a pizza. Their pizza is much better. And they just crush Domino's, who's optimizing to make the most per store, right? That's a crazy observation. And so I figured, like, if you looked at these things and you tried to break down what is it that makes people better, and you could see some people that, I was really inspired by, like Simon Sinek or Jim Collins, who really have tried to study this as an idea. There is some correlation between having a really well-articulated philosophy and a clear mission and vision and values that correlates with success. So I'm really passionate about that. And something also I think about writing about abstract stuff like metaphysics or epistemology, all these philosophical things, leads towards the need to be clear in your communication, because so much writing, not just philosophy, but other fields, is intentionally dense, or people don't really understand what they're talking about and they use this academic jargon. And I don't think most of the stuff needs to be as complicated as it is. So you can kind of pick up a thread off of that where you'd like, but I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of my favorite quotes of all time. It's an Albert Einstein quote where he said, if you want to impress someone, make it complicated. If you want to help someone, make it simple. And you just threw in two of the big words that I really want to attack there, which is dense and jargon. Those are the two that I really want to go into, because you obviously you work in the B2B space, and you guys specialize in companies between $1 million and $10 million in revenue and seed to Series A startups. And so I'm going to throw all of them under the bus right here, right now, Garrett, because gosh, as someone who hosts a podcast, I receive at least 20 pitches a day for people who want to come on the show, which is awesome. We're super appreciative to get as much interest as we do. But Garrett, they all sound the same. They all use the same. I think they're picking from a piggy bank of like revolutionary, innovative, they all have the same words. What's going on in that marketplace? Why are we as business owners at all levels, I'm not just going to pick on them, why is it that we're all picking from the same words that we think either sound smart or sound impressive or make our businesses sound so revolutionary and innovative? Where have we gone so wrong?
People don't legitimately understand what words mean. And you can see this when you see words like innovation, synergy, democratizing, disruptive, revolutionary, right? We use words that other people use as a way of showing that we're part of the group that they're in, right? So which is why industries have their own jargon. Doctors have it, lawyers have it, startup founders have it. Everyone's got it. But when you realize that there's multiple forms of communication that are going on, which is I am trying to explain something, I'm trying to communicate the value of something, which are not the same things, right? Teaching and selling are two different modes of communicating. Or I'm trying to signal in-group membership, you realize that communication is not this monolithic thing, right? And I think, especially for founders, you should never, you may have to, especially if you're talking to VCs, show some amount of like in-group jargon to indicate that you're there and you should be there. But realistically, most people screw up because they try to explain instead of communicate the value of something. And you can think about the difference between teaching and selling is if you're talking to somebody who wants to learn from you, if you're like selling an info product, then yeah, you should be educating, right? But if you're talking to someone that needs to understand why they should give you money, your job is to really stop explaining what it is and instead explain how it benefits them. And that's where like an easy takeaway for everyone here that you can use for basically everything. If you expanded this out, it would be a pitch deck. If you push it down, it's a one-liner like the one on my website. Problem, pain, solution, benefit, right? It's hard to grow your business when you don't know how to talk about it. That's our first line on the website, right? Problem, pain. It's hard. It sucks. Solution, benefit. Lucid helps you grow, talk about your business with clarity so you can close more deals, right? That focuses more on the person that you're speaking to, which is really important, right? What most people screw up is they start talking about themselves. They start using big words to indicate they're smart. And at this point, you've already chosen to focus on something other than the person in front of you who really needs to hear, you understand me. You're indicating empathy, right? And you're an expert who can help me, which is indicating authority, right? If you want somebody who wants to read deeper on this, the Story Brand guy, Donald Miller, talks about this at length. He's among the greatest communicators on the planet, in my opinion. But yeah, I think people don't understand what their job is when they open their mouth. And their job should be to indicate that you can solve problems for people that are willing to pay you for the solutions to those problems.
Yeah, I love the way you articulate that for all of us here today, Garrett. I want to ask you this question because I always think about, I have the coolest job in the world as a podcast host. I just think about the listeners. And I'm like, what are they wondering? If they could be here and ask you a question, what would they ask you? Just knowing that our audience is both wantrepreneurs and a heck of a lot of entrepreneurs all over the world. And the question that we always get from people is, well, what do I do with it? Whether we're talking about video marketing or social media, or in this case, we're talking about words, we're talking about messaging and positioning in a marketplace. You gave us that real life example of pizza places, and I love that, even though you threw in Papa John's towards the bottom. Papa John's needs more loving, but it sounds like they need to be less vague. What do we do with this stuff? When we figure out our messaging and positioning, where does it go? How do we make sure that it actually gets to the masses so that you and I, as people who just eat pizza, we know what Domino stands for versus I don't actually know what Papa John stands for? What do we actually do with that messaging and positioning?
The easiest way to look at this is there are three, if I was explaining like you could call it a funnel, I would call it more, I used to use the term orbit, right? And this is the difference maybe between actively and passively marketing, but if you're doing content marketing, it's more passive in nature. But there are three layers to your orbit. As a visual metaphor, let's pretend you have a planet that you're trying to get aliens to show up at, right? Somewhere out in space, you have UFOs, which are unidentified future opportunities. These are leads that don't know you exist yet. You don't know they exist. They're out there somewhere, right? First, you have attraction, which is how are you getting them to get any indication that you exist? If you put content out for any length of time, someone's eventually going to find it. You could think about when they sent out that probe that they just shot into space that has all the information about Earth and how to find it for aliens. That's attraction. So you're putting content out, and when you do this, you should focus on primarily indicating with your content, I solve a specific type of problem for a specific type of person. Meaning, I understand your pain, right? I understand the problem, and I have authority to help you solve that problem. You can do this by making content that's based around common problems that people in your ICP have. ICP, for everyone listening, if you're not familiar, is ideal customer profile. And I usually break that down as ICP squared equals person times problem. So the person that you're trying to help, you have to have information about them, and the problem that they have, you have to have information about. When you put those together, you have a really clear way to target. For example, if you know that a person is 30 and works in tech, makes $300K a year, where do they go to dinner? You don't know, because you only have the person and not their problem. If you have a person who is hungry, do they go to McDonald's or a Michelin star restaurant? You don't know, because you don't know anything about the person, right? But you know their problem is they're hungry. So you need to have the intersection of the problem and the person, and those things combine into allowing you to make a good problem statement, which is the hook, more or less. So if you ever see a TikTok video, you may not stay on the video, but it certainly catches you at the front end when they say something like, have you ever had this happen to you? Don't you just hate it when your ads aren't working? That hits you because if you're the person that video is made for, they've hooked you. So when you're putting content out in the attraction phase, you're trying to hook someone with a problem and pain. Pain is what calls us to act, right? If you put your hand on the stove, you will take your hand off the stove because it hurts. If you're a person with no pain receptors, you put your hand on the stove, you'll just keep it there, right? So pain is actually a good thing, and there's something that I call twisting the knife, which is the perfect example of this. The one ad close that ever happened to me, the best ad I ever saw. I'm like scrolling on Instagram at 8 o'clock in the morning in bed. I'm just like hanging out on the weekend. And I see an ad that says, are you a creative agency owner who hates paying your taxes? I said, yes, that's me. Where do I sign up? I signed up for this company's called Collective. I actually didn't enjoy their service very much, so I'm not a member anymore, but that was the best ad I've ever seen. And I talk about it all the time because that ad identified me, the person at the time, a creative agency owner, and my problem, which is I hate paying my taxes, right? So they put out something that I found. It twisted the knife because at 8 o'clock in the morning when I'm on Instagram in bed, I am not thinking about paying my taxes, right? And it called me to action because I clicked on that ad and signed up. So that's kind of what it looks like when you're doing this right. That first layer is attraction. That second layer would be interaction. So how do you get them to do something with you? In this case, their call to action was click here and figure out how to stop hating doing your taxes. And traction is what I would call the third stage, where somebody's engaging with you. So how do you get them to engage? At that point, there's a sign-up process they perform on the website. There's some other parts of their funnel. But that's in a nutshell. That would be how you activate this stuff.
Yeah, Garrett, I want to ask you this because I think you have an unfair vantage point, and which in turn you have an unfair advantage because you're not in the stuff of these businesses every day. I think that's where we as entrepreneurs, we really get bogged down, is we live inside of this stuff. We're so close to it. That's why I've always loved that concept of you can't read the label from inside the jar. So obviously working with people like you and bringing Lucid in for any company gives them that outside, that external perspective. But where does it even begin? Because I'm sure it's a combination of asking the right questions and getting past that bogged downness that we all face as business owners, and whether it's the business owner itself or a C-level executive, that we think the certain way that we think. How do you get them outside the box to take that 30,000 foot view and say, hold on, let me not think about this in my day-to-day. Let me think about my customers. Let me think about what we actually stand for and our values. How do you begin that process with them?
Yeah, so typically, not always, depends on the project, but typically what we do is something like 8 to 10 hours of consulting. And we have a process of 4 sprints that I've developed over the course of probably the last 4 or 5 years. Stuff that some of it came from when I was working at that design agency. Some of it I developed at my agency, and I slowly took pieces, added them in, and cobbled something together. But in that process, the most important part, which is a little bit, I guess it's twofold. Part of it is you need to have a second person to talk to. So us being there, Brian and I, because we both have been on either side of this problem, both being founders and consultants, we get that. But also there's a concept in design thinking called diverging and converging thought, which in the design method, this is basically the 2 core components, right? First, you have to do diverging thought, which is brainstorming, spitballing, throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And in that phase, you're just coming up with ideas. You're just spitting things out without judging, which is important. In the second phase, you're converging and you're only judging. You're only cutting things. Everything's bad. There's only stupid ideas until you find something that works. The problem when you're doing this yourself is you're trying to diverge and converge at the same time, which is basically not possible to do. So you end up doing exactly nothing. And you sit there and just, oh, I should really come up with something, right? Which is like writer's block. So having a structured method to go about thinking about these things with people that understand the position that you're in and have a process that you can go through to think through this stuff is really important. And even when I, coming up with the one-liner that you saw on the website, that more or less is the product of 3 years of working through the design agency and failing to figure out how to explain that simply. But even when I was coming up with the one-liner, it involved me sitting down with my roommate, who's a very experienced sales guy, and he knows enough about what I do to give context for like 4 or 5 hours. And we just ran through it, and then we finally got it. And when you get something right, especially with regards to branding or messaging, you should feel it. It's like chills down the back of your neck or like a light bulb moment. That's how you know that it works, because you're getting an emotion out of the thing, and that means that you're going to elicit emotion from your ideal customer, right? So being able to go through that, and also I know what the natural things that people are going to want to do are, which is, oh, I'm going to just take the first thing I came up with, or I'm going to use a bunch of industry jargon, or I'm going to say, oh, our values are innovation and synergy and teamwork and a lot of generic stuff. Like I look for what lights people up when they say it. I'm looking for what elicits emotion from the founder that we're working with, or the co-founder, whoever's on the team. And I want to pull that out of them. And I want to be able to, it's weird because there are other ways you can go brand, but I guess the way that I try to do this is like we're pulling something out of the soul of the founder, because when you put that out and communicate that, people that resonate with that part of yourself will resonate with you. And this is probably different if you're a later stage company where you have hundreds of employees and you've been established for a while. But for early stage brands, the founder is, unfortunately or not, an inseparable part of what the company is. And you should lean into the essence of that person, because that spirit that they have makes it work. So being able to like identify the parts of what the founder is saying that lights them up, that's clearly something they care about, that they're willing to suffer for through the process of being a founder, that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for. And I know how to see that. And sometimes we don't know how to see that in ourselves.
Yeah, really well said. And actually, Garrett, I want to publicly thank you for your transparency. I think that's so important, is that you just called out that even something as simple as that headline that I bragged about at the very top of this episode, and you've leaned on because it does so succinctly show what your company does. You just so transparently shared with us that was years in the making. I feel like all too often we add something to our to-do list and we think, oh, I'll just sit down on my computer and I'll just bang that out real quick. But it's not real quick. And there is a process. Where my head goes, for years, I've always asked friends of mine, entrepreneurial friends, where I'm just like, I have an idea. Can you play red team? And I love you talking about diverging ideas and converging and really using that red team, green team to measure these things out adequately. But it is that process. So I love hearing the way you think about that. I will also publicly say that I knew we'd be short on time here today. So listeners, we're going to be inviting Garrett back for an Action Saturday episode. You can be rest assured. But Garrett, before I let you go, I always love asking this question at the end of episodes, and I never know which direction you'll take it in, because you have such a wealth of knowledge and we only scratched the tip of the iceberg here today. But what's your one piece of advice? What's the one takeaway, knowing that listeners tuned in from all around the world today at all varying stages of business growth? We've got 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs that tune in, as well as a heck of a lot of wantrepreneurs. So what's the one thing you hope everyone walks away from today's episode with?
When you get feedback, you're going to go and do stuff, and you're not going to be very sure what exactly you're doing. When you get feedback from people, the thing that everyone says is the thing that you should be focusing on. So for me, it was realizing after however many testimonials I got that the one word that showed up over and over again was clarity. And when it clicked for me that was clarity, that was what became the branding for Lucid. Is what if I went all in on making the company centered around the company that gives you clarity, right? That is the thing that made it make sense. So you're trying to find that central concept that has an emotional component to it, And it's going to come from engaging with your users or your customers or whoever you're working with. They're going to tell you what it is. And in that vein, whatever it is not what you think it is. It doesn't really matter what you think it is. It matters what it needs to be for the person that you're serving. So be cognizant of that. Try and be as egoless as you can. You have to have quite a bit of ego to be a founder, obviously. But with regards to what you're doing, it does not matter what you think it is. What it's going to be, that's a different thing. But how you're presenting it is not about you. Don't talk about you. Talk about the problem that people have, the pain that they're in, and how you're going to help them solve that pain and get a benefit. That'll solve everything for you.
Whoa, Garrett, I'll tell you what, in 900 some odd episodes, never has that been the advice that a guest has chosen. It's super powerful and it's actionable for all of us. And I think it's a really unique perspective that because we're so in it, we don't often take the time to stop, pause, ask for that external perspective, and then take it into account. So huge kudos to you. I know that we are teasing so much about the brilliance of the way that I'm also going to call out your design background. Everything, like I said, it's just beautiful. Not just the words that are on there, but everything about the way, even scrolling down your website, the way that you guys tell that story of clarity, of business growth. Listeners are going to want to check it out. So drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, our website is lucidconsult.ing. So it looks like Lucid Consulting, but the dot is before the ing. So yeah, check us out on there. There's a link on there if you want to book a free call with us. I'm happy to talk to you. I am not a high pressure salesperson. I took an oath years ago to get out of my shitty hometown to not do sales anymore. So that's why I do pitching. It should just be stuff that sounds good. We help solve problems. If that works for you, we will happily help you do that.
Yes.
It doesn't, I'll find you someone who can.
I love that, Garrett. Honestly, I really do. As someone who's never taken formal sales training, I'm right there with you. Just have real conversations, and if you can solve someone's problems, it's a match made in heaven for both parties. So I love that attitude. Listeners, you already know the drill. We are making it as easy as possible for you to find Lucid, which is Garrett's business, at lucidconsult.ing, lucidconsult.ing. You'll find that link down below in the show notes, wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode. So you can click right on through to that link. We're also linking to Garrett's personal LinkedIn if you just want to reach out to him and thank him for coming on the show, or you just want to tap into more of his advice and wisdom and have one of those conversations with him to see where his expertise can guide you. So don't be shy. Scroll right on down through to the show notes. Otherwise, Garrett, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks everyone for listening.